Can you make yourself a monster 48-hour uninterruptible power supply by swapping out the tiny onboard battery for a dog pile of car batteries? Find out the ins and outs of UPS hacking on this episode of System. Welcome to System. I'm Patrick Norton.
And I'm Roger Chang. So a few weeks ago, we got an email from Ernest who wrote in, "We have many short blackouts or brownouts due to weather in San Francisco. My trusted APC UPS's internal battery died the other day. Now, can I replace its tiny battery with a car battery? That should last 1 to 2 hours instead of 5 minutes. Can System do an episode on this topic?" Ernest in SF.
Do you ever have blackouts?
Actually, I've never had blackouts. I've had brownouts where, no, I take that back. I've had bouts of at least 4 to 5 hours of blackouts.
Really?
And it's kind of weird because, all North American cities, their power lines are based on the grid.
Right.
And so, one half of the street will be brightly lit. It'll be like Las Vegas. The other half will be totally dark. And unfortunately, my half of the block is usually all dark.
That's really odd, because I almost never have blackouts unless the entire city's blacked out. So Ernest, whatever neighborhood you're in, probably near Roger, we're sorry to hear your pain. Now, if you're not kind of up on the whole UPS thing, a UPS or an uninterruptible power supply is a way to keep your computer running if the power from the wall socket goes out. It's essentially a big power strip. It's got a really fast switch inside that can flip from the 120 volts at your wall socket to 120 volts provided by an inverter connected to a sealed battery inside the UPS. When the power goes out or browns out, that is, dips well below 120 volts, the UPS powers your machine from the battery. And as you'd suspect, there's a battery charger inside the UPS to keep its batteries topped off and ready to go.
Now, generally speaking, a UPS is sized with enough battery power so it lasts enough, long enough so you can actually turn off your computer by saving all your files and shutting it down normally. Now, quite a few of you out there in System Land would like to have several hours because oftentimes if you're in a condition where you cannot save right away or you just want to work a little bit longer, I don't want to work a little bit longer. You want to
play video games.
Play video games. You want to be able to squeeze, a couple hours instead of a couple of minutes. So one of the most interesting things we'll be doing is essentially kind of hacking one of these to do just that.
First, we got to talk about the whole safety angle.
Safety? Come on, these things are so safe a baby could play with it.
Well, the UPSs are pretty safe, but bringing any acid-filled box into the house or dorm room or small office is generally a really bad idea. Especially old-school flooded acid car batteries that, if tipped over,
No, don't tip it over.
Spill acid all over your floor. Before you start on this project, I highly recommend that you put in stock the biggest boxes of baking soda you can track down, because if you do end up spilling acid, this will neutralize it. And I know, hey, you're thinking, I can just huck baking soda on the spill and neutralize the acid. That's fine if you're home and the cat or the baby doesn't walk through it before you get to it. But I haven't even mentioned the horrors of severe overcharging, which at best will ruin the battery and at worst will fill your plastic box of acid with hydrogen, which will happily blow up with the addition of a small spark and, say, melt your legs or the wife's car, not to mention the house, the cat, your carpet. That's kind of the worst case scenario. When lead acid batteries go wrong, they tend to go really, really wrong.
And even if it doesn't ignite, some of the gases, especially the hydrogen, it's not something you want to be huffing, especially in a closed room. So it's one of those things you want to make sure that you have access to plenty of outside, just in case something goes horribly, horribly, horribly wrong. Yeah,
well-ventilated rooms are critical to this one. I mean, in theory, it'll float up to the ceiling, but if enough floats up to the ceiling and you light a cigarette, you're going to blow the neighborhood up. Well, your room up or your face. So seriously, if you kill your cat and burn your house down after permanently disfiguring your face when you dropped a clothes hanger across the battery terminals with the battery stuffed under your desk that's been actually releasing huge amounts of hydrogen and oxygen because you've been overcharging it, it is not our fault. This project can be categorized under the not a really good idea, and you're responsible for your own stupidity if you do this.
And then the battery in this particular UPS, my UPS died, and I say, well, let's see what happens. We both know people that have modded big batteries to work with UPSs. Patrick happened to have a big truck that he could pull 2 hefty 12-volt car batteries out of it to experiment with. Now, the charger in this UPS barely kept the battery that came with the UPS charged, so It's going to be a bit of a challenge to see if it can keep these charged when they're not pulling voltage off them.
In theory, we shouldn't have issues with overcharging, like serious overcharging. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I mentioned earlier, it's a pretty simple project, right? You'll need a 12-volt battery if your UPS has a 12-volt battery. You look at the UPS battery that you're pulling out of your UPS and see what it says. Somewhere on there, it'll mention its amp hour capacity and its voltage. We're going to talk more about battery selection a little bit later. You're going to need cable of the appropriate gauge to go from the UPS battery connectors to your battery. You can pretty much guess by looking at the cabling inside of your battery. It actually is listed on the side of that cable. Generally speaking, go with heavier cable if you can. You'll never go wrong by using basically overspending on copper.
Because, there's nothing worse than having that monofilament line of copper suddenly just burn in two, and oh my, the voltage has nowhere to go and you're starting a fire in the insulator.
Hate it when that happens. So you're going to need clamps that'll work with your battery's posts or sockets, the appropriate pliers and cutters to work with your connectors, and some way to mount the thing, preferably fairly permanently, because this is not the kind of thing you want bouncing around your house. So, AGM or absorbed glass mat batteries, where the acid is contained in basically a fiberglass matting inside the battery, they're a really good step up safety-wise from sealed batteries and especially flooded lead acid batteries. They'll cost more, but it's going to be cheaper than several weeks in the hospital if, we said it before, things go wrong. A battery box is also an excellent idea for this project. I'd say mandatory. At the very least, put the battery in a pan filled with baking soda, preferably Pyrex, because the acid won't go through the Pyrex. And really, I'm just going to say it one more time, well-ventilated rooms only. And one last time, if you burn your house down or melt your face off, it's not our fault. Right about here is a good time to remind you that car batteries are a really dumb choice for this. They're cheap, but they have lots of thin lead plates designed for maximum surface area. Some people say they're more like a sponge than a block of lead. They're designed to produce the maximum amount of amperage. They like thousands of 2 to 5% discharges that hold cold crank and amp things. That's the usage profile when you start your car. They do have enough basically deep capacity to keep the engine running and the lights on for half an hour plus, but 30 to 150 deep cycles will just about always kill a car battery dead. Deep cycle batteries, however, have big, thick lead plates designed to be discharged way down, like 70–80% over and over. They're not as good for starting a car, but they are great for extended use, like if you want to keep your UPS up for hours. Now, let's talk about serious overcharging.
Yes, let's.
So, this is very unlikely if you have a UPS with a small 12-volt, 4 or 7 amp battery, but serious overcharging, like basically putting too much power into this, say connecting somebody's
Is that even possible with something of this size? Or?
One type of overcharging is impossible with this, but you can also end up with trickle charging.
Okay.
We'll talk about trickle charging in a second. Severe overcharging, which is basically just shoving too much amperage in the battery for too long. Again, this is unlikely if you have a UPS with a small, 4 or 7 amp battery. Can at best ruin the battery by sulfating the plates, and at worst generate a mass of hydrogen and oxygen that gets us back to the whole exploding at the first spark thing. If you discharge your battery a lot, figure a car battery is going to last about a year, a deep cycle battery will last 4+ years, and a super costly premium deep cycle, super expensive, heavier than your car battery is going to last upwards of 8 years. Now, if your uninterruptible power supply has a 6-volt battery, you're going to need to track down a 6-volt battery or another UPS to mod.
But thankfully, we have here a UPS that uses a 12-volt battery, and we have car batteries on hand, so they're both 12 volts. Now, we're using them for this project, so it's worth spending some time, if you can, with a volt ohm meter to find out if your UPS is designed for trickle charging or float charging. Now, float chargers have circuitry to prevent overcharging. The battery voltage is topped off, it shuts down until the voltage drops down again. That way, you're not piling voltage on top of voltage. Now, trickle chargers always charge the battery, even if it's already fully charged. Eventually, it'll damage your battery because, basically boils the electrolytes or sulfates the plates.
That's bad.
That's bad, horrible even. Now, if your UPS has a trickle charger, you don't want to connect it to a car or deep cycle battery. If you do, be prepared to replace the battery or batteries regularly. Not so. Yeah, so, if you can, just try to match it up. These things you can find used or at least on Craigslist for like $20.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that you can actually buy from Radio Shack or Fry's or Best Buy or Battery Mart, or there's lots of sources of them, replacement batteries that will exactly match the battery that came out of your UPS. And if you want to do that, that's awesome. It's pretty easy to replace. You just yank 2 cables, plug the new cables on, make sure you got positive and negative right, slide it back in the UPS and screw it back together, and you're done. What we're doing is going to take a little bit longer, so let's cut back to the workshop. All right, welcome to the workshop. We got our basic pile of supplies here. We got Roger's uninterruptible power supply. We got some 10 gauge cable to match the 10 gauge cable inside the power supply. Something we didn't talk about yesterday, we got a fuse. We're gonna run like a 15, 30 amp fuse inside of there to keep from melting the house down. We've got spade connectors to match this. We've got our battery and a couple other things we'll show you in a minute. Right now though, I'm gonna get busy, attach some spade connectors on this, and we're gonna get the cables into this and see how much cable we need to reach the battery. As we mentioned, baking soda neutralizes acid. At the very least, get yourself a nice Pyrex-y kind of dish. Fill the bottom of it full of baking soda, and should you boil over a little of the acid, setting that in there, I would highly recommend putting a strap around the top of this to hold it in place on there. Will neutralize any acid that manages to get out of the battery. That said, we're going to use a battery box. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about connecting up the battery in parallel. Just for fun, rather than doing a lot of cutting and getting out our favorite crimping tools and custom making cables, which is always the cool guy thing to do, we decided to be simple and use some pre-made battery cable. Just make sure you do not cross the cables at the end of the positive and negative, because if you do, you'll get a really horrible spark. So when you put these together, you'll see that the bolt is designed pretty much to nestle in on one side of this. It's a little square head bolt. If you're gonna leave your batteries in a tub full of baking soda under the desk, get yourself a pair of terminal guards, and these things essentially slide over your cables and prevent you from having one of those giant glorious sparks like we saw. To do these in parallel, which we're doing to extend the longevity of our battery, you would connect them in parallel, which means negative to negative, positive to positive. Do not screw that up. Now you notice this isn't really going to bolt to that, although you could bolt it to the front posts if you have them on there. What we did is grabbed what are commonly called marine terminals, and they combine a couple of useful bits and pieces. Obviously it would be really nice to have a shorter cable, but again we went with what was available. And these are going to pop down on here, remember, positive to positive, negative to negative. We're going to pop these off real quick because we're just going to use a single battery for right now. So if we power a disco ball, it shouldn't be absorbing a whole lot of electricity. If it does, we'll deal with that problem later. All right, we've got a set of the cables on the battery, and let's get our battery box out. If you've never seen one before, this is what people, or what we're referring to when we call it a battery box. Basically, it's designed to sit on the floor. It's got a lid, vents to allow explosive gases to vent, and the lids are designed so that there's a place for the battery cables to safely pass out. Basically, once you look inside the battery box, there's going to be a couple clamps basically to hold this strap to the floor. The strap's going to hold the box to the floor. If you don't want to drill into the floor of your house or apartment, you can substitute a big square piece of plywood for this. Remember, don't drill through the bottom of the battery box. That is bad. It's designed to be a sealed place to contain sulfuric acid from the inside of the battery. But basically, these get screwed down. I don't think I have to explain it. And then you literally have a seat belt that holds this together. And that's basically going to keep the lid from coming off. There are more sophisticated battery boxes, but this is pretty basic. And if you use the strap and the clamps to secure this to a big sheet of plywood or your floor, it's going to be awfully hard to tip this thing over and damage things in your house. At this point, it starts to get really simple. Unless, of course, you've misplaced your wire. So for all the purists in the audience, I would like to apologize for using red cable for my negative connection. I'll cover it with some black tape. but I just happened to have a whole lot of this laying around, and that made it easier. All right, we're going to use some appropriate sized ring terminals to connect our extension cables to the battery cables. All right, made one little adjustment here. We're missing a connector we thought we had, so we're going to take these ring connectors against our spade connectors, spade lug connectors, sliding instant off connectors. Those are going to go inside of our battery box. And then we are going to connect those to the UPS and plug it in. So give me 2 seconds, we'll have this thing up and running. All right, so we got our emergency disco ball and emergency disco ball light. They're hooked into the uninterruptible power supply, which is hooked into the battery. And does the battery power it?
I'm impressed.
Mr. Prager, will you verify that the power has been unplugged from the uninterruptible power supply?
It is indeed unplugged and beeping to tell you that there's no longer a sustainable power supply except for your UPS, which will be unsustained when it runs out of juice.
Well, we're going to work on clipping the wires to that happy little howling alarm that tells you that this is off, and maybe putting a light bulb on it instead of an LED. Or what do you call those things? Beeper?
Yes, emitter of sound.
Yeah. Piezoelectric emitter of sound. Anyhow, the beep, annoying. We're going to kill that out of this next. The UPS is running, and hey, who knows how many hours we can get out of a disco ball now. All right, we're back from the workshop. Stuff's charging, everybody's happy. Ernest, though, and just about everybody else that wrote in, they want much longer uptime on the UPS.
Now, if you want 48 hours worth of UPS uptime, you're going to need to figure out how much the amperage draw is. In my case, my UPS has a 7 amp hour battery, and it lasts about 10 minutes to keep my machine up and running. Now, if I want it to last an hour, I'm going to need 42 amp hours out of a battery. Now, if I want 48 hours, 2 days, I'm going to need 2,016 amp hours. So that's either one fat battery or a bunch of batteries.
Yeah,
I mean, a lot.
Basically, yeah, you get a big enough battery to deliver the amp hour, the watt hours that you need, or you connect multiple batteries in parallel into banks of batteries, which is generally what you see in, the electrical systems on RVs and off-the-grid wind or solar power homes.
Now, connecting 2 or more batteries in parallel, i.e. positive post to positive post, negative post to negative post, keeps the voltage constant.
This is good.
Now, but it combines the capacity of all the batteries to deliver a higher amp hour or watt hour, if you prefer, rating.
Right.
Now, one thing you want to keep in mind, this is kind of a safety tip, they all have to be of the same voltage and highly recommend, or actually we highly recommend, they're of all the same amp rating too.
Yes. And if you do combine batteries in parallel, remember that you need to replace the positive and negative charging cables at opposite ends of the bank to charge all of the cells. Basically something that looks like this. The reason you do that is basically the current's coming, the ground, the positive, and you basically want them to reach in and charge all the batteries in between. If you put them all at one end, it's just not going to work.
Doesn't it just cycle right at the tip?
That's my understanding.
Yes.
I've never tested it to find out what badness happens.
We did it a long time ago in physics class. We were trying to basically, believe it or not, this is my summer class back in junior high. One of our projects was to cook a hot dog with a bunch of batteries in parallel in serial.
Yeah, we should make it abundantly clear. If you start putting a bunch of 12-volt batteries in parallel, 3 12-volt batteries in parallel, a set of jumper cables, and a piece of rod is enough to weld basically weld broken vehicle frames back together.
Rubber gloves, really thick rubber gloves.
Well,
no?
Rubber gloves, yes, but even more importantly is if you do disregard our valiant attempts to make your home safer by keeping the acid-filled battery boxes out of it, you really need to make sure that all of the posts and all of the copper and all of the connectors on this contraption you've put together are well insulated, because if somebody drops something back there, there will be a giant spark. It's arc welding. You do not want to arc weld things in your house. It is a bad thing to do.
Unless you're an arc welder.
So, Ernest, everybody else who emailed in, that is the The secret of building your own uninterruptible power supply powered by a 12-volt battery. We do not recommend you put this in your house, and we recommend you take every possible safety precaution if you do. And again, one last time, if you melt your face off, kill your cat, burn your house to the ground, or anything else bad, don't say we didn't warn you and tell you not to do this.
Yes. Warning, warning, warning. Do not do this if you're really clumsy or you're just not going to pay any attention to all the safety issues we've brought up. Because, you know,
It's all fun and games until the battery tips over, burns a hole through the carpet, and takes out the wife's china. That'd be bad.
had that happen in a Volkswagen. Except there was no china. It just burned through the floorboard.
Also bad. Something that's not bad is the Totally Rad Show. This week, Alex, Dan, and Jeff take you behind the scenes to a fan appreciation party for the new Puzzle Quest, Galactrix, and share their thoughts on the Oscar-nominated Waltz with this year. Totally Rad Show covers everything from movies to video games to comic books and plenty more. You can catch the Totally Rad Show every Tuesday. Every Tuesday, a fresh edition hits the street. On the internets, anyhow. 3 p.m. Eastern at revision3.com/TRS.
And as always, if you have any ideas, comments, or suggestions, please email us at system@revision3.com. And don't forget to visit the forums at revision3.com/forum. And of course, you can visit our archives at revision3.com/system.
That's like making the slash.
Oh, okay. I
Makes
thought it
me
was some
happy.
sort of ball game routine.
Nope, just slashing in between the revision3.com and the system. In any case, I'm Patrick Norton.
And I'm Roger Chang.
We'll see you next week on System.